Anna Botin, thank you so much for speaking to Bloomberg. Now, a lot of the focus now is on climate change ahead of COP26. What do you need from regulation now to do more for climate change?
So our big task as banks, I mean, most of us are net zero in our own operations, and the big thing is how do we help our customers transition to green? So what we need first a common language. Yeah. We call it taxonomy. So what is green? We need to ensure that stress tests are aligned across countries and regions. We also need governments to have policies that are common, because otherwise you're going to have unintended consequences and, others financing what some are not financing. And so we do need that clarity and coordination, hopefully across the world.
So will we get it? If you look at some of the anxiousness in banks right now, partly because of asset managers, partly because people say, well, look, if you have credits, it doesn't really help with the root of the problem. How much more will be done in the next 2 months?
Well, I think I think COVID has helped us because we've realized that we depend on each other. And it's exactly the same for climate change. And even though some people say you're not seeing it, I mean, extreme weather, you're seeing a lot of the signs that we are in a very dangerous path. And so I think that consciousness that it has to happen now and it has to happen working together is very much with us in the private sector, banks, governments, regulators. So there's a real push for coordination happening and for having clarity. What is green? How do you measure? What do we do about it?
I mean, the EU, for example, changed some of their metrics and saying some products are, not labeled or should not be labeled green, and they were in the past. Will we see a similar move from Asia and the US and others?
Well, that's a goal that we have, I think, with COP in Glasgow, is that we have more alignment on the global standards. And again, we need to speak the same language. Otherwise, it's not gonna be done in the right way. My biggest concern is not leaving customers behind. We are seeing that with the energy price increase. Going green will have a cost, but there's also a huge opportunity for business and investment. And so doing it in a way that we can bring along the more vulnerable customers, the developing economies that are not starting in the same place as us. I mean, in Brazil or Mexico, people need a home, not just a green home, a home. And so how do we get this done in a fair way across different countries and sectors? That's the hardest thing for us.
What has been the impact actually of energy costs on some of your customers? Is that one of the biggest things that we should worry about, that we're underestimating the societal impact, not only inflation?
Well, there's a lot of talk, and this is linked to the big issue in financial markets today, which is inflation, which is this a temporary issue? And I believe it is, in the sense that, COVID is a one-off and it sort of created a spike, but US, China already ahead of where they were pre-COVID. Europe will be there in Q1. And so I do think energy is a factor, but hopefully it's part of the broader picture of how do we green the economy at a cost that we can afford and that is fair, and where the cost is borne by everybody in a fair way.
And you have a great snapshot of the world, because you have an overview of the emerging markets, of the UK, of Europe, of the US, of Asia. What worries you about what we're living through at the moment economically?
So first, let me say the positive. Okay. We're in a much better place than a year ago. 6% global growth for this year, or 4% for next year. That's IMF latest predictions. It's actually pretty good. And so I think that is one thing. The other is, of course, governments, especially in the developed world, were very much, in a timely way, making sure that businesses survive. And so I think those are very positive signals. The other one is, of course, there's been a huge amount of savings. I mean, Spain, for example, in 2020 increased savings by 110 billion. That's almost 10% of GDP. On the risk side, what happens with the excess government debt? What happens when businesses and people are taking off life support? Do they go back to being, in a regular situation and able to cope? Is inflation temporary? Those are the issues we need to tackle.
And that could mean that we could see zombie companies? Or again, what are you hearing from clients? As you travel around the world, what should we be focused on? And what should leaders be focused on?
Well, the same issues as before. I mean, I think one of the things we all have to manage, and we were already doing that, is how do we approach customer behavior that is radically different? 50-year-olds and anybody above that age had a hard time banking on the mobile. During COVID, a lot of people have actually had to do it because they didn't want to go out of their homes. And so, how do we bring people along that digital transformation? How do we ensure that, everybody has a chance in the new economy? I think those are the big issues, responsibility of business. For us, it's climate change and financial inclusion. Those are the two big areas we've decided to focus as a company. And I think each company has to choose where they want to have most of an impact over and above their business impact, right? Creating jobs and serving customers.
I mean, right from the start, actually, as a big banking chief executive, you were one of the first ones to talk about the digital transformation, about fintech companies. How do you see Santander operating with fintech? Are you creating a lot inside? Would you be looking at buying? How does it pan out in the next 4 years?
We're quite different from others in the sense, we have in-market scale and global scale. And so our global scale is 150 million customers. In 2019, I think with you here in London, we said we'll be investing 20 billion over the next 4 years in technology to make the transformation. We very much believe we need, and we had decided to work along three verticals or three strategic, priorities. One is what we call the One Santander. How do we make a single global platform that is at the same time able to compete locally? Again, 150 million customers across Europe and the Americas. The other one is our PagoNext, which is our global payments company. Yeah. And then we have the digital consumer bank. So we're going to both do it inside the bank and also within an autonomous payments company that we believe can be one of the top 10, 15 global payment companies in the medium term.
And this is what, through market share? The global payments company?
Yes, in terms of transaction volumes, we, for example, in merchant acquiring would be around 10th in the world already. And we're working on three verticals, which is merchants, trade, and consumer. On consumer, and this is still within the banks, we have 60 million active cards. So we have the scale in terms of customers, very important, of what customers do with us, payments and cards, merchants, but also in terms of investment capacity. Again, as I always say now, it's only down to execution.
How do you see the fintech space actually changing in the next 5 to 6 years? Is it payment the next big thing, or is there something else that needs to be disrupted?
I think the next big thing, which is already here actually, is crypto. So I think it's already happening. We talk a lot about the CBDC, central bank digital currencies. The fact is you already have around 100 billion of stablecoin US dollar, fiat currency, digital currency in the US today, unregulated outside the system. And so how do we think about that? There's a huge amount of innovation happening, and in an area that is very much systemic. It's about monetary policy and how that gets managed, whether it's inside or outside the system.
So how do you look at crypto? And actually, do you have to be, as a chief executive chairman, a believer of crypto to be able to have the right products for your customers?
Well, we are sort of a leader in crypto. We issued the first end-to-end bond on the blockchain, which is a technology behind crypto. We have a very strong group, not huge, but strong group on that. And the big thing is, how will central banks want to manage this? Will they manage it themselves? Will they create a framework and tell us how to do it? Will they do nothing? I think they will be working with us, with the banks. And it's also what role we want to play in that value chain, right? Yeah.
And how many customers actually want to buy Bitcoin? Do they come to you or to your cashier?
They actually do, but we've been quite slow in adopting that because of compliance and regulatory and risk appetite. But we're now getting into it, so we're now either about to offer or already offering crypto ETFs. So being very careful about the know your customer, but being able to offer the product.
When you look at some of the things that we should be looking out for, so I know you want to go quite aggressively in the investment bank and take on the US lenders. How will you do that?
Well, that is a big aim you just described there. We are probably one of the top 2 or 3 corporate investment banks in Europe already. Our investment bank went from being 18 to being about 25% of earnings last year. But it's very focused. So we wanted to be focused on the verticals where we can compete. We're world leaders in renewables, in infrastructure, and then in the regions and countries where we can compete. So where we can be very competitive with the biggest banks in the world is when you have a customer in the US that wants to buy a company in Brazil. Even when you're a Chinese company investing in LATAM, we're actually the go-to bank. Or you want to do a Europe-US transaction. So where we have this, as I was saying, in-market scale, and we know the corporates really well, we can connect better than almost anybody. But we're not pretending to play in the big leagues in some products. I mean, that's not our aim.
Talk to me a little bit about Basel III, briefly.
So the first thing I want to say is European banks, and I can say this as a representative of the European Banking Federation, which I'm chairing right now, we all want to be Basel compliant, and we think it's very important we are Basel compliant. What we also are saying, it's important we can continue, as we have during the crisis, to support our customers and the economy. And so finding that balance is really what our aim is.
And you think we'll find that balance?
I'm always optimistic about these things.
How optimistic are you about the green recovery changing some of what you're seeing in Spain or some of the imbalances in Europe?
Well, I mean, I would put it in a positive way. Rather than imbalances, I would say complementarities. So I think, Southern Europe, Northern Europe, we complement each other. We can not all make the same things. If we all make BMWs, who's going to buy them, right? And so the question is, how do we have a Europe that is stronger? I believe in stronger together. I think Europe has shown leadership during the crisis. We've shown we learn from what doesn't work. So we learned from the 2008 crisis. We were ahead of the markets in scale and speed. And so I think that is really good news. And my hope is that we continue along those lines with capital markets union, banking union, common services, and really finding the way to work together between North and South, because I think each of us have a space and we know what works. Investing in education, being more productive is what will allow us to have a more inclusive Europe.
So given what we've seen with Brexit and maybe some of the things that we've seen here in the UK compared to other countries, where do you see the future of Santander UK?
So I see the future of Santander UK working together across that one Santander vision we have. So I at the end for us, serving our customers in Britain or in Poland or in Spain, we're not that different. We all want simple services that work fast, that are competitive in pricing, that are easy to use. And so we have created one single European leadership where some products will be built in the UK and some products will be built in Poland or Spain or Portugal. And it's a very important role because our bank here is significant. We have, 15 million active customers, 20 million total customers. So it's a very important role within Santander.
Do you think we'll finally see some kind of cross-border banking consolidation in Europe?
I don't see it for now. No.
Why?
Because, even though I've said, and I'm very optimistic about the future, we don't have a single banking union. We don't have common deposit insurance for cross countries in Europe. There is a penalty for becoming bigger that I don't think, at least my view is, banks are not going to be so happy to pay. So I think it's hard. The rules need to change.
Does that impact actually green finance at all? Or is it two separate issues? You don't need bigger banks to be able to offer more services.
No, but as we've seen in the US, 10 years ago, European banks and US banks were about same value, other things equal. Today, there's a big gap. Yeah. And I get asked this question. One of the reasons is we don't have a single market. There's different rules. You cannot expand across Europe. It's for us, it's for fintechs, it's, all players.
And a final question. If we don't get an agreement from a substantial agreement from leaders at COP26, what can finance do? Can businesses actually, do much more, much faster?
I've said this a few times. We cannot be the police for climate. We can lead, we want to lead. We have taken very important steps, but we also need, and I think governments, regulators, and us also, we need to do a lot more, as soon as possible. But we need to work together on that, because at the end, it's our customers that need to transition. So there need to be plans from governments to end subsidies to fossil fuels. So our customers can have appropriate transition plans. And if you go to small customers in rural areas or developing economies, they need to be able to pay for that with some rules that are across the countries, hopefully across the world, and a common, or aligned at least.